Welcome to Global North. Please subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon for more updates. Are you worried about how new Supreme Court decisions could impact your gun rights? The Supreme Court, the highest judicial authority in the United States, is once again turning its attention to the Second Amendment, a constitutional right that has sparked passionate debate for generations. This term, the justices have agreed to hear two significant cases that could reshape the landscape of gun rights and regulations across America, potentially affecting millions of gun owners and lawmakers. The recent surge in gun-related cases follows the landmark 2022 decision in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruen, which marked a turning point in how courts evaluate gun laws. That ruling set a new, stricter standard. Modern gun laws are only constitutional if they align with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation, making it harder for governments to justify restrictions. This has triggered a wave of legal challenges and confusion in lower courts, as judges struggle to interpret what counts as historical tradition and how to apply the new test to modern issues. The two cases on the docket, United States versus Himani and Woolford versus Lopez, address media, court documents for United States versus Himani and Woolford versus Lopez, news coverage of gun law cases, federal courthouse exterior, whether the government can ban gun ownership for illegal drug users, a question that could affect thousands of Americans facing prosecution under current federal law, and whether states can restrict carrying guns on private property without the owner's consent, an issue that pits property rights against the right to bear arms. The outcomes could profoundly impact how gun laws are written and enforced, building on the Bruen framework and potentially setting new boundaries for what is considered constitutional. Legal experts say these rulings will set important precedents for the future of gun regulation in the U.S., shaping not only federal law but also influencing state and local policies for years to come. Other major gun law challenges, like bans on certain firearms and magazine limits, are also in the pipeline, with courts across the country grappling with how to interpret the Supreme Court's evolving guidance. These cases are still working through lower courts, and their outcomes may eventually reach the Supreme Court as well, further shaping the national conversation on gun rights. For now, the Supreme Court's focus is on these two pivotal cases, with decisions expected by July 2025. The nation is watching closely, as the rulings could have far-reaching consequences. The rulings will provide critical guidance for judges nationwide, clarifying how to apply the Bruen standard and offering a clearer roadmap for future gun law debates and decisions. One of the most consequential and closely watched cases before the Supreme Court, this term is United States versus Himani, which directly challenges the federal law that bans gun ownership for individuals who use illegal drugs, including substances that are legal under some state laws. The law in question, 18 U.S.C. § 922G(3), makes it a federal crime for anyone who is using or addicted to controlled substances to possess or purchase a firearm, regardless of the circumstances. The government argues that this restriction is necessary to protect public safety, claiming it is consistent with a long-standing historical tradition of disarming those considered dangerous or irresponsible. On the other hand, the defense contends that the law is overly broad, lacks a true historical parallel, and unfairly targets people, including marijuana users in states where it's legal, who aren't necessarily dangerous or violent. Several lower courts have already ruled that this federal ban is unconstitutional, arguing it infringes on the rights of otherwise law-abiding citizens, which has increased pressure on the Supreme Court to finally resolve the issue. The case now forces the court to confront a fundamental question. Can the government disarm people based solely on their drug use, or does such a ban violate the core protections of the Second Amendment? The outcome of this case will have far-reaching consequences, potentially affecting millions of Americans and helping to define the limits of government power over gun rights for years to come. The second major case, Woolford versus Lopez, asks whether states can ban carrying guns on private property without the owner's explicit permission. Laws like Hawaii's make most private businesses default gun-free zones unless owners say otherwise. Supporters argue this protects property rights and public safety, giving owners control over their premises. Opponents say it creates confusing rules and undermines the right to self-defense in everyday places. The court must balance property rights with the constitutional right to carry firearms in public. If upheld, More states could adopt similar laws, expanding gun-free zones. If struck down, it would reinforce the right to carry in more places. The decision will set a crucial precedent for gun rights in public and semi-public spaces. Both cases hinge on the Supreme Court's pivotal 2022 Bruen decision, which set a new standard by requiring that modern gun laws align with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation. This means that, for a gun law to be upheld, it must have roots or clear parallels in the country's past legal practices and customs. As a result, lawyers on both sides are now digging deep into 18th and 19th century history, searching through old statutes, court opinions, and even personal letters to find support for their arguments. The past has become a battleground for today's legal debates. In the Hemeny case, the government is looking for historical examples where authorities disarmed people considered dangerous, hoping to justify modern restrictions. Opponents, however, argue that there's no tradition of disarming individuals solely for drug use, making the law unconstitutional in their view. Meanwhile, in the Woolford case, Hawaii must demonstrate a historical tradition of restricting guns on private property without the owner's explicit consent. Challengers counter that, historically, the default was to allow guns unless property owners specifically objected, making Hawaii's law a break from tradition. Ultimately, the justice's interpretation of this complex and sometimes ambiguous history will play a decisive role in shaping the outcome of these cases. The Bruen test has transformed Second Amendment cases into intense historical debates, with lower courts often reaching inconsistent rulings as they struggle to apply centuries-old precedents to modern issues. The Supreme Court's upcoming decisions will be crucial, clarifying just how closely modern gun laws must mirror historical practices in order to be considered constitutional, and setting the tone for future legal battles. Some gun rights advocates criticize the DOJ's strategy in Hemeny, arguing the government chose a case with an unsympathetic defendant to sway the court. They warn that a ruling based on bad facts could set a dangerous precedent, affecting millions of law-abiding Americans, including legal marijuana users. The Supreme Court must decide whether to issue a narrow ruling or address the broader constitutionality of the law. The Supreme Court's decisions will have sweeping consequences beyond drug use and property rights. The rulings will clarify how lower courts should apply the Bruen history and tradition test, bringing consistency to gun law rulings nationwide. In Hemeny, upholding the ban could bar legal marijuana users from gun ownership. Striking it down could challenge other non-violent gun restrictions. In Woolford, upholding Hawaii's law could lead to more gun-free zones. Striking it down would expand the right to carry. These cases will define the practical meaning of the Second Amendment for years to come. The court's reasoning will guide future challenges to red flag laws, waiting periods, and bans on certain firearms. The rulings will shape the next wave of Second Amendment litigation. The Supreme Court will hear arguments and issue rulings by July 2025, making these among the most anticipated decisions of the term. The justices may rule narrowly or broadly, affecting millions of gun owners, especially those who use marijuana legally. The Woolford decision will set a key precedent for property rights and public carry. The court's approach signals a careful, case-by-case method for defining gun rights. For gun owners and advocates, these rulings will clarify the evolving landscape of firearm rights in America. The Supreme Court's decisions will have a lasting impact on the right to bear arms and the future of gun regulation.